Imagine having access to a tribe of mentors consisting of some of the best tech leaders in the world, people you may have never heard of, but who in just an hour you'll know their unfiltered career story, the bets they took, the decisions they made, where they failed, and the lessons that they learned along the way. Welcome to the What Makes You Tick podcast. Hello, I'm Tolu, aka the Podfather, and I have the pleasure of hosting What Makes You Tick.
Hello, Podfather.
Hello,
I'm
Richard.
Richard Washington. I am the founder of Tick Talent. We sponsored this podcast. Tolu, having you as the guest of this podcast brings every episode to life. And I have to say, when I've listened back to this episode, because my lovely wife Gaia has been editing it all day, I just keep hearing you and Abi talking, and it's the most amazing conversation because you two connect so well, and she's such an interesting character. So I love this conversation. Shall I tell you why, Tolu?
Tell me why.
So Abi is not someone who stands on ceremony, nor is she someone who just accepts the status quo, nor is she someone who's just all about, we need to hit the numbers at all costs. She really gives a crap about people, about doing the right thing, about setting the right culture, about creating the systems that scale. And she's worked with some of the biggest businesses in the world, from Meta to Udemy to all these incredible companies, LinkedIn. And now she works with startups as a CRO. She's the perfect guest. And I really love what she has to say. And I think there's a huge amount for people to learn here about challenging the programming and thinking of what it means to be a tech company with a sales organization, sales leaders, and aspiring salespeople. That by understanding Abi's story and how she went from pips to CRO is something that everyone can take value from. As the man, the legend, the podfather who had this conversation, what did you enjoy the most?
Abby's just the real deal. She's been there, done it. She knows how to do it well. So yeah, and she's Nigerian, so got to love that too. So yeah, just a really great human who's doing great things and helping other people to be great. So yeah, loved the conversation with Abby.
Amazing. That all being said, Tolu, I think it's time for our guest to go and meet Abi. So without further ado, let's roll the V2.
Abi, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I'm very excited to have our conversation. So Abi, what makes you tick?
That's a great question. I always say to people that, the way, I don't know if you ever heard this quote, the knowledge is power, right? But I say that the application of knowledge is power. And what makes me tick is the ability to learn something, apply it, and use it to create power. And I think this is a really unique, I suppose, blessing for me because, I learn from different places. You're learning upward, sideways. I learn from my kids. I learn from everybody around me, right? And very, very quickly, my brain is able to decipher that learning and apply it.
Yes.
Like if I read a book, for example, for me, success is what are you going to do differently as a result of that book? And how have you used that book to improve yourself or improve something? So I would say that that's what makes me think. And I love it.
I love that. Talk to me a little bit more about power. What does that mean to you?
So for me, power means impact, positive impact, right? So, for example, in a place of a revenue leader, one of my goals is to ensure that when people meet me, they leave better than they came. As a human being, as a sales professional, as a leader, and as a business, right? And that impact whereby even after they've left my team or I've stopped working with that client, that impact continues. And I mean positive impact, great impact. For me, that's what power is. And, the ability to use that to drive something great and just multiply.
I absolutely love that definition of power because I think when you first think about power, you think of 48 laws of power and different things like that. And you think of how people use power selfishly, but you're talking about power that enables other people, power that gives other people the ability, the impact that they want and that the business needs. So I think that's a really important distinction of your definition of power.
Absolutely. It's a place of service. A lot of people think it's a place where, people do what I want them to do. It's a place of enablement, of service, where you help people achieve what they want to achieve.
And tell me a little bit about your career journey. So I've stalked you a little bit on LinkedIn, and you've had an amazing and impressive career. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about it, but from your eyes.
Oh, it looks amazing from the outside, but gosh, let's not get started in terms of the the realness behind it. But thanks for that. So I started my career in sales. I just landed in sales. It was like, all right, this is the easiest job I could get. And it's funny because even when I started in sales, I did it so wrongly. I was in a lot of pips. It was just like
Wow.
horrible until I understood what selling was, and I realized that wait,
Mm,
actually selling is actually solving problems. It's actually
mm,
understanding a problem and giving a solution to that problem. And for me, that's when it clicked. So I started my
wow.
journey in Oracle. I was in Oracle as an individual sales contributor for years, and then I joined, LinkedIn, and then I went through the leadership ladder that way, and then to companies like Meta and Pluralsight and Udemy and so on and so forth. But it's been an interesting journey, and a time of learning firstly what sales is, and it's a place of service
Yeah.
which just connects to me as an individual authentically, and then also it's a place of leadership, because you get to meet different people, you get to meet along the journey, you get to from a customer's perspective and from a team perspective, like you're learning different things, right? I remember in sales where you have different territories, you're talking to different businesses and so on. All of
Mm,
that is a place of learning that a lot of people actually don't take enough advantage of. Like every time you meet a
mm,
client, that client or that prospect is from a different industry. Like there's so much you
mm.
can learn and soak up, that can make you even much richer as an individual. Um, so yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and then also going through that journey, having different leaders, seeing how not to do it from a leadership perspective, how not to do it from an organization perspective as well. Seeing a lot of organizations start well and go down the drain, or a lot of teams and cultures within the organization start really well and then just go down and people leave and you lose great people and so on. So it's been a journey of learning what to do and how not to do it, which has really helped me, when I work with my clients, because I've seen, companies that do it well and don't do it well. So you have that two
Yeah.
versions, and that case studies to help, organizations be successful.
What were some of the things that you had to learn when you were early in your sales career that made a big difference from going from, being on a pip to being successful as a salesperson?
I think it's really the importance of discovery. And, I'm
Mm,
an individual that I love to really get under the skin of a problem, right? Really, like I always say to salespeople, you know, where you win is not in a demo. Where you
mm,
win, where you actually close the deal is in the discovery. Because until you can truly understand the problem you're trying to solve, why is this important for the client? If they're able to solve this problem, what's going to happen? What is the impact? Like really understand that. Only then can you really propose a solution. And I feel that,
mm.
even when I talk to leaders and salespeople and so on and so forth, a lot of people don't get that. They're thinking, sometimes they think, oh, if I do a demo, they're going to love the product. It's not about the product.
No,
Nobody cares about the
no.
product, actually. It's about you solving a problem that I have confirmed to you is a problem,
Yeah.
and a problem that
Mm,
you understand the impact of solving that problem. What would it mean to you if you're able to solve that problem? If you're able to reduce your cost by 20%, what would you use that 20% for? Would it
mm.
mean a promotion? Like getting even down to the nitty gritty of what it means to really help that customer solve that problem. And I think, that is missing a lot. Even when I speak to a lot of founders, and for example, I spoke to a founder recently who has this solution that looks at the emotions in Zoom, and I'm
Wow.
like, okay, that's great. But
Mm.
what problem are you
What?
actually
Yeah.
solving or trying to solve, right?
Yeah.
Because, we need to go back to meeting a true need. Like when I speak
Mm,
to founders at early stage, I say to them, if you can meet a true need, then everything else follows in terms of the
mm,
success of your business and
mm.
funding and finance and so on and so forth. But we need to go down to the root of meeting a true need, a true problem that people are trying to solve. If I go back to that story of that founder, the emotions, tool, it's a nice to have, really, because
Mm.
especially in the economy today, if we're looking at, oh, I want to spend money, I'm certainly not going to spend money on a tool that reads the body language on Zoom to let me know if I've had an interactive meeting or not, right? So we really have to really get back to that core of solving problems. And I think, for me, once that clicked, that was it. To flying and develop real relationship, having real conversations, and solving real problems for businesses.
I think you're so right, because especially because this is almost like your baby, right? Like when you founded something, you are so in love with it because it's your baby, right? Everybody else doesn't
Exactly.
necessarily have that same feeling about it until they understand what it's exactly going to do for them, what it's going to drive in their businesses, how it's going to make their lives easier. And I think that's quite a hard adjustment for people to make.
Absolutely. And this is why I always say that, for founders or CEOs and so on, make sure you have like a coach, because you're so attached to it, you can't see it. Like it's the kind of like a blessing and a curse, that roadblock,
Mm,
right? You
mm,
need somebody to be able to ask you, what problem is this really solving? Is this like a vitamin or painkiller? Right? Like you need
mm,
your solution to be like a painkiller whereby people cannot literally function without having the solution. And that takes time to
mm,
really, find out, what is the product market fit? Like, is this really a problem that is worth solving? Like, versus
mm,
just jump into something and create something because I like it. And because I
mm,
like it, people are going to buy it. It doesn't work
mm,
that way.
mm. No, not at all. Not at all. What's some of the impact that you've been able to have in your career that you've been really proud of while you were still working in other businesses?
Ooh, I think that's a very interesting one. For me, it's really the ability to lead a business organization, lead revenue in a people-centric way, with people
Mm,
at the center of execution. And when I say people, I mean employees, right? Employees being engaged, connected to the vision, teams, directors, connecting to the vision, understanding where we're going, understanding what it takes to get there, and us doing it in a way that everybody's engaged, everybody's connected, and so on, right? The ability to do that, I think, is really rare.
mm,
And for me, I've been really proud of being able to do that, grow businesses, but with people at the center, culture at the center of execution. And I think people take that, they don't place enough importance on it. A lot of people
mm,
think culture is like, oh, the ping pong table, or, giving lunches and so on. No, culture is how we treat each other. How do we treat our clients? How do we show up
mm,
every day? Are we a team that
mm,
shares when things are working, or are we a team that something is working for somebody and they just go off and they continue to be excellent, but not sharing it with the team? Are we a team that
mm,
truly works together? Are we a team that care about ourselves professionally and personally, right?
mm,
Because I truly believe that if you're able to lead a wholesome team, when I say a wholesome team, I mean like lead the person in front of you, a whole person. Like I always say to managers and leaders, how
yeah,
you
love
leading
that.
as a whole, right? It's not about,
Mm,
hey, how's work and how you doing with your targets and so on. Because if you, Tolu, are not okay personally, maybe there's something going on with you, behind the doors and so on, it's going to impact your results, right? So
mm,
you can't really get the best out of the business if you don't know
mm,
how to work with people, and if you don't know how to get the best out of people, or if you don't know how to lead a wholesome team. Because if your
mm,
team is not whole, your business is not going to be whole, and certainly your customers are not going to be whole, right? So a lot
mm,
of people
mm,
they fail to make that connection, that everything comes down to the people. And like I
mm,
always say, until we get to a place where you can run a business with AI and robots without human
mm.
beings, then maybe you don't need to focus on that. But
Yeah.
you need to understand people dynamics, is what I call it. Like people dynamics. What makes your team thick? How can I lead
Mm,
Tolu? How do I understand Tolu in order to get the best out of him? That's
mm,
unique to different people. Somebody else, maybe they like to be encouraged, and other people just wants, they want more close coaching. Another person just wants to give them the target and let them go figure it out, right? It's about understanding
mm.
the different individuals in your teams and knowing how to get the best out of them in order to create something awesome.
One of the things that we were talking about before we started recording was about being able to be people-centric but still get amazing results. What are some of the practical things that you've been able to do? Because I think that's a tension that people often struggle with, is I do want to be people-centric, but I have to deliver amazing results, right? Because I feel like we're in an environment where good isn't good enough anymore, right? People need more growth. Things need to be moving really quickly. How do you practically balance those two things? What are some of the things that have been successful for you?
Yeah. I think firstly, it's about the mindset of knowing that those two things are not either or, they're actually connected. So being people centric and running a good business, solid business is actually connected, right? To the point of, if you don't get the people, the business part would not work. So firstly, as a leader, it's about knowing that those two things are not separate. It's not like, oh, I'm going to be people centric today. And no, it's actually what drives the number, right? So some of the things that I do is firstly ensure that, from hiring, from the beginning of the stages, ensure that you're very, very clear on the kind of people that you want to hire in your team. What are the ethics of the team? What are the things that we do in these teams and the things that we don't do? For example, in our team, we share. In our team, we share what's working. In our team, we help each other, right? In our team, we don't, if one person wins and others are not winning, that's not winning, right? We have cultures and values that we operate, our modus operandi as a team, as a sales team. This is how we treat our clients. This is how we operate as a team. This is how we operate. Even when I hire managers, I want them to write down, what is their story as a manager? What do they want to be known for as a manager? And we have a central theme and ethics in terms of how we operate and how we lead as a team. So that's number one. That's a basic foundation when you're hiring and bringing in managers or AEs and so on. Second thing is, what you permit, you promote. And what I mean by that is, when you see things that are not in line with the virtues and the ethics and the things that we've outlined, that this is how we operate as a team, what are the consequences? How do you deal with that, right? Because if you take an eye off, it's important that the team know that this is how we operate, right? We don't operate outside. We do the things that we don't do, and be super clear on it as well, because you have some people that have these values and so on. It's just written on the wall, but people have different interpretations to it. For example, I remember there was a time I was in an organization and we had this guy, this AE, who sold a really, really great, massive deal. However, he promised the client some side deals that he shouldn't have, right? Some managers would ignore that. Some directors would ignore that, but that could not be ignored because that's a big thing. That's integrity. That's against what we stand for as a team, and I had to pull that off, and he wasn't paid for that deal, and he couldn't understand why we would do that. He has closed the deal and so on, but no, that's not okay. So, and then another example that comes to mind is, I remember years ago there was a guy in my team who just wanted to win regardless of his team, right? He was always hitting his targets and so on, but wasn't a team player. And when it came to promotion opportunities and so on, he didn't get promoted because of that reason. And I remember being in a one-to-one and he was crying because he just couldn't understand. He didn't think that that piece was important enough. And I had to send that message that it is. If you're going to operate in this team, in this organization, this is just as important as you hitting your number. How you hit your number, how you operate with our clients, how you show up as a team member is just as important.
Is there ever any backlash from having to take that kind of hard stance? And if there is, how do you deal with that?
I wouldn't say backlash, but because it's such a unique way of operating, I don't think a lot of leaders operate this way, and I think it's the most underrated gem that a lot of leaders are yet to see. I mean, in one of my organizations, I grew the revenue by 660% globally, top performer globally. My organization was the top in terms of the voice survey. I don't know, those employee survey things. Everybody in my organization were happy to get into work, great feedback. They were learning, they were being coached and so on and so forth, right? So I've proven that it works again and again and again. However, you have some leaders who don't really buy into that, right? However, but when the results follow, they start to pay attention, right? They start to pay attention. So backlash in terms of, don't think I've really seen any backlash because my leaders are seeing the results and I'm telling them this is how I'm getting the results. So they
Interesting.
normally just sit back and smile. But what I did notice is when I leave organizations, things start to fall apart.
Wow.
Because these organizations didn't appreciate that how of leadership. So when I leave, I notice that they lose all their great people. The kind of feedback that I get about the organization kind of changes because they're not able to, or they haven't built that way of leadership, and they're not able to keep these people that have seen a new way or great way of being led, right? That's why when you said that you've had great leaders, I said you're quite unique because what I see is that in a typical journey, you would have one great leader. One.
Really?
If you're lucky,
Wow.
two. Yes, if you're lucky, two, right? Because most leaders are actually not great. Not because they don't want to be great, but they just haven't learned what it takes to be great. There's no playbook. Most of the time, most leaders just got into their roles because they were performing very well or they were in the right place at the right time and so on. And then they learned from a leader who learned from somebody else the strategies of 1977 of leading by spreadsheets, you know, and then everyone just kind of carries on that way. So yeah, it's and this is why I do the work that I do to try and change that and actually teach how it's done.
I think it's a really interesting thing with the backlash because I played basketball, right? So a lot of my mindset goes to basketball, and what you were describing kind of sounds like almost benching your star player, right? Like they do something that's not in line with what the team needs to be doing, and so you bench them. And a lot of people would be nervous or hesitant to bench their star player because, well, this is the person that's scoring all the points or signing all the big deals. This is the person who's hitting target, and now I'm kind of benching them, you know? So a lot of times that comes with some friction and some issues. So I love that you've done the brave thing because it's better long term for the culture. That's so important, I think, for people to get.
Absolutely. And you know, it reminds me of it brings me back to this story of, and it's how I operate personally as well, right? I remember when I was an AE at, I think LinkedIn, I had this big deal that I was trying to sell to a client, and let's say that the deal was like worth, what I was proposing to the client was worth, let's say 100K or something, and then the client wanted a like 50K solution, and I said to him, listen, there's no point in us doing this if you're not going to do it right. Based on all the problems that you've told me that you're trying to solve, this 100K solution is what's going to work for you. Go back to the board and have a conversation. If not, let's scratch this and come back to me when you're ready.
When you're ready to spend the money.
And at that point, I'd been like 3 months in the role. I hadn't passed probation. I'm sure my manager at the time were like, this girl, man, we don't even know if she's going to survive here or not, you know. But it goes back to doing the right thing because I truly believed that if the client got the 50K solution, they're going to come back and say that it didn't work. And it's not going to achieve the impact that we're talking about, that we spent all this time. And then thankfully the client, of course, this was tough. You're like, whoa, that 50K would have taken me away, like way over my target, right? But I had to do the right thing, right? And then the client went back to the board, thankfully, and everything went, you know, went as planned, and we went for the full solution. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is that in those moments, this is where your ethics and values come in, regardless of the consequences, right? And, you know, we have to come to a point as human beings, not just leaders, to do what we ought to do, regardless of the consequences, you know. So, yeah. And I think, I'm pretty sure that guy who didn't get promoted because of how he was showing up in the team, I'm pretty sure he remembers that. He will never forget that. And I try to make impact while I work with people that lasting impact beyond our time together.
And I think that links back to what you said earlier about power, right? And you being able to push back on a client and say, hey, this is what I think you should do, them actually listening to you, doing it and getting the right result. That's a great example of the power that you were talking about earlier, or even like the guy that was in your team who now knows that being a team player is important. That's such a great example of how you can use your power to make that right impact.
Absolutely.
from what you said earlier, it sounded like LinkedIn was where you started to get into leadership. Is that right?
Right.
And what were some of the adjustments you had to make from being an IC to starting to become a leader?
So I always say that leadership is not a title. It's a state of mind. So even before I went into the physical title of leadership, I was always a leader.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is it's a mindset, it's a place of service, right? And this is how I identify leaders in my team. When you see people who naturally care about how the team are performing, they naturally care about helping somebody else to be successful. You just see those natural traits. I saw myself in my team after I've closed my deals. I'm trying to help and coach somebody else in terms of discovery, how to get their deals above the line and so on. And I enjoyed that, right? I would care a lot more about how are the team doing and so on. And I cared more about helping somebody succeed than even when I closed deals. When I started closing deals and I'm just like, oh yeah, but you closed a big deal. I'm like, yeah, I guess. But
Yeah.
I was more excited about, I helped this person on this deal. I coached them throughout the cycle and then they closed the deal, right? So these are traits that you see naturally, that gives you, that picture of what a great leader could be. And this is really important because what I find is that people tend to promote the top performer in their team to become manager. And that doesn't always work because a top performer who is just very self-driven and self-motivated will not necessarily be a great leader. So again, leadership is not a place of authority where I get to tell people what to do. No, actually, good leadership is a place of service. It's a place of care. It's a place of leading a whole team. It's a place of questioning. It's a place of digging in. It's a place of remembering that Tolu, you said that you had an appointment yesterday with the doctor, me following up and caring enough to say, hey, I hope that appointment went well. Is there anything I can do to help? It's a big job. It's a big deal because you're carrying the revenue responsibilities, you're carrying the board responsibilities, you're carrying the people responsibilities as well. Because at the end of the day, being a leader is such an important thing that people carry it home. And what I mean by that is, I had some terrible leaders that were so disruptive that I would go home and talk about whatever happened at work. I'll maybe cry about it. My husband is involved, and then I'm maybe taking out my kids and so on. Like people carry it home. So the impact of great leadership affects everybody at home, and the impact of terrible leadership affects everybody at home. And people don't really realize that. And that's why I think that place of leadership is a place of great responsibility, and it's one to really go into if you truly care about these things. But if you don't care about people, please just stay an IC and just keep closing your deals.
And I think that something we often don't realize is that the negative impact is often way bigger than the positive impact. So when you have a great leader, of course you go home, you're more relaxed, you talk about it, but almost that good is kind of what it should be, right? But when you have bad leaders and that bleeds into your home, the impact is magnified way more and the impact is way worse. So I think sometimes we don't quite think about how important that really is.
But another thing to add to that is because there's more bad leaders, there's more I don't know, maybe 90% leader, like most leaders are just like, not because they're bad as human beings, but they just haven't been taught, or they don't have that mindset of learning, unlearning and relearning. Most of the time they get to a place of leadership, they're like, oh yeah, I made it. And that's it, they stop learning. They just do whatever they've learned from their managers and just kind of replicate and do exactly the same thing. And I said that to say this, that piece of unlearning whereby you're able to apply new solutions to old problems or apply old solutions to new problems is so key. And it's been a game changer for me because, even when I had terrible leadership, I would question. I remember there was a leader I had in one of the organizations, and this leader said to me, Abi, if you don't change how you operate, you need to operate the way the guys operate in the room, or you need to talk this way, you need to act this way. And I'm like, no, No,
Hmm.
because the way you all operate is not in line
Not
with
how I
what
would
I
be.
stand for. So
Yeah.
no,
Mm.
right? Somebody,
Mm.
and this is where you have to be sure about your values and ethics, right? Because sometimes some leaders trying to make your strength a weakness because of their own,
Mm.
because they're of
Insecurities.
their own, in drawbacks or weak or their own weaknesses actually.
Mm.
So it's important
Mm.
that you're clear in terms of what you stand for and who you are and your values, right? So I looked at that
Mm.
leaders and I'm like, no, I don't want to be like you. I don't want to operate like you. And shortly after I left that organization, so I tend to use the journey of the bad leaders is actually important because it helps you to learn what you don't want to be doing and
Yes.
how you
Yes.
don't want to be functioning. So there's a learning in that. It's not a fun learning, I tell you that, but
Mm.
it's a learning in itself, right? And what I've done most
Yeah.
of the time is when I leave organizations, I go and get bigger jobs than these managers that were managing me because I try to use these
Mm.
trials as testimonies. Because
Yes.
I ask myself, wait,
Yes.
why do you say I can't do that? I'm like, okay,
Mm.
so if I don't have that skill, I can learn that skill. I can go
Mm.
figure out how to get that. So sod you,
Mm.
I'm gonna go get it.
Mm.
And I go
Love that.
learn whatever the gap that I have is, and I go get it.
Mm.
So it's
Mm.
funny because most of the people that led me, when you look at a career trajectory, I'm at a different place,
Mm.
right? So I
Mm.
guess my point
Mm.
is, to even people experiencing these kind of challenges with their leaders and so on and so forth, you can actually use it. Use that fire to
Mm.
propel your career and
I
your
love that.
results, and be careful what feedback you take because people will give you
Mm.
feedback based on their own incompetencies. I'll give you a last
So
example of
true.
that. I remember I was working in an organization and we were in an executive meeting, and then somebody said something about diversity and so on, and how they think this thing about women is just overplayed and so on because they have a son and they don't think the son is going to have enough opportunities because there's so much talk about having so much talk about women. And I said to her, well, actually the playing field is not equal. The playing field is set for men to be
Mm.
more successful, and here's why, and I threw out some stats and reasons why and so on and so forth. But anyway, because that was not the topic of the meeting on that day, but it just came up, we were just talking about it because I think I had an event or a talk or somewhere. And then anyway, so the MD at that point in that organization came to give me feedback that, my communication, I need to work on my communication. And I'm like, oh, tell me more about this because I know that communication is one of my strengths, right? But I was like, tell me more. It was
Yeah.
like, yeah, for example, in that meeting, some people felt a bit uncomfortable. And I'm like, okay, do you know who felt uncomfortable precisely? Because I have a different picture. People came to me to go, hey, Abby, that was really interesting. Can you tell more about this? And so on. But I
Mm.
realized that he felt uncomfortable. And because he felt uncomfortable, he was trying to give me
Yeah.
feedback that I've got a communication issue because he felt uncomfortable, right? So the point I'm trying to make is we
Mm.
have to be very cognizant of those things. Somebody your own leader trying to
Mm.
give you feedback because of their own loopholes, right? That was a he
Yes.
problem,
Yes.
not a me problem.
Yeah.
Somebody else would have gone, oh, I
Yeah.
need to work on my communication skills and go off working on your communication skills, right? So we have to be very careful about who we take
Mm.
feedback from and see those lines, those blurry
Yeah.
lines where, the person is trying to use your strength as a weakness because of their own discomfort.
Mm. I think it's such a tough balance, that, because you want to be open, right? You want to be humble and say, okay, I'm open to feedback, but you also have to be very discerning to understand. And I loved the question that you asked, right? Tell me a bit more about that, because I think often in
Yeah.
those moments we kind of go into like, oh, feedback, oh, I just take it, and you don't have the
Yeah.
presence of mind to be like, okay, tell me a bit more. Where does that come from? How would you have
Yeah.
thought I should do this? And then you can take all that
Yes.
information and decide, does this align with who I want to be? So I think that's so important.
Exactly. And of course, when I started asking, tell me a little bit more about that. Who did that come from? What? Give me an example. It went into and then it started to stumble. And then
Yeah.
immediately I knew that this didn't have any
Yeah.
substance. It was a place because he was uncomfortable. So,
Yes.
and just because somebody, and then the other thing is, most of the time
Mm.
we think just because somebody is a leader or somebody is more senior than me, they're more intelligent. Listen, the more
Mm.
I go into those rooms,
Mm.
the more I see how not intelligent and incompetent a lot of people are. Trust me. So, the more I go into those boardrooms, the more I go into the execs, the C level and so on, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of incompetent people in those rooms who just happen to be in those positions because of chance, because of connection, or because of different reasons. So let's not be fooled by that. So just because somebody is your manager or is above you, position-wise, doesn't necessarily always mean that they're more intelligent or they're more competent than you. Because some of us are in different positions because of place, time, connection, privileges, different reasons, right? Number one. Number two, to be conscious of what kind of feedback you get, be conscious of who you get feedback, and know your strength so that you can know what you really should work on and what feedback is coming from a place of ulterior motive.
And one of the things that I wanted to ask you was about your leadership philosophy and your leadership principles. So it sounds like you've got a pretty well-formed philosophy. Where did that come from, and where did that become quite set for you?
I think it's from being led by terrible leaders, leaders who don't care about you, they just care about the numbers. But yet leaders who are not coaching leaders who like support you and work with you on the trenches, like, having a leader who's really quarterback with you on the deal, coaching you, not judging you, but empowering you. I haven't really had that much of a leadership, and it's really, for me, it was the opportunity to course correct this so that other people don't have to either find this out themselves or learn the hard way and so on. And I think it's the quickest way actually to success, because if you're able to lead your team the right way, you're going to be more successful in your results, and the business will win better. And then also, it's just part of being a human being, a kind human being who actually genuinely truly cares. And I think if you can tap into that as a leader, your teams will be happier, their productivity will be much better, and the business will be more successful. So yeah, it's because I didn't have that. It hasn't been around me, and I think everybody deserves great leadership. And this is why I spend a lot of time trying to teach this to leaders and executives at all levels.
I couldn't agree more with you. We came at this from slightly different angles, right? Like, I've had only good leaders, and you've come from kind of the more pain place. But I think we both agree that, look, everybody needs to learn how to lead, right? We need great leaders because people lead other people all the time, even if they don't have the official title. But yeah, I think it's such an important thing. And over the last few years, you took a bit of a leap of faith in starting your own business. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, and what is it that you're doing now?
Yeah, so in the last 2 years, I decided to leave corporate because again, with this agenda of how do I make tomorrow better? How do I help companies to be better? Having gone through this journey and seeing how to do it and how not to do it. So what I'm doing right now is I spend a lot of time, firstly as a fractional CRO to companies, helping them drive their revenue and really look at, okay, their processes, their systems, how do we drive revenue with employee centricity and customer centricity and actually be successful. Again, there you have a lot of companies who are just using strategies from 1927, and the times are changing. So it's really having that ability to apply new solutions, to be agile to old problems, apply old solutions to new problems, and just understand what your clients need, what your employees are wanting, how can they be more productive. Again, coming from a place of, if I can ensure that my clients win, then I'll win. A lot of people don't get that. If your client is not successful or they haven't said that your product has made them successful, it's not going to work, right? So helping customers and organizations across different sizes be successful in their go-to-market strategy. Another place that I see a lot of organizations get it wrong is you have sales doing this and marketing doing this and products doing this, and then sales blaming marketing and so on. It's the same goal. Everybody in the organization has the same goal, which is customer satisfaction. Because if that's there, it's going to bring revenue and employee satisfaction. That's the goal, right? So I'm passionate about ensuring that from a go-to-market perspective, there's one goal. How we get to that goal is different. How product gets to it is different. How marketing gets to it is different. But we all have one goal and one target, right? Again, that's another thing that organizations don't seem to get. And this is why a lot of organizations are failing today. And then also I spend time, doing a lot of public speaking and so on. So I spend time as a CRO for companies. I spend time, coaching, on the job coaching. Now, again, there's a lot of trainings for salespeople, but there's not a lot of trainings for a lot of leaders and actually not trained. They haven't gone through a lot of training, right? A lot of CEOs and CROs don't know a lot of things, but they're not going to come out and say they don't know because they get paid really, really high wages. But they're expected to know, right? But a lot of leaders and executive leaders at this high rank, high critical positions are covering. So they're pretending like they know, but they really don't know. So what I do is I act as a quarterback and that secret person, teaching them what they should have known ages ago, but they don't know. Teaching them things like, from, on the job coaching, from forecasting to how do you run the business? How do you build your first team? How do you show up at the board meetings? What should you share with the board? Why? How do you lead your team to be more productive? How do you set your communications? How do you set the target? How do you set the goal? How do you bring your team along the journey? What are the milestones? What are the risks? How do you ensure that your plan moves from a plan to a reality? Right. This on the job coaching is what I do with CEOs and CROs, and I work with some leaders as well, even below that line, to help them be great leader on the job success.
What's been one of your favorite success stories from your coaching?
Oh, I have a lot. I'm thinking, does a favorite come to mind? Because I think from interactions with me, people get better professionally and personally. And those things are interlinked because I talk about two things, competency and character. Right? Competency now, it's not that much of a big deal because AI is pretty competent. Really competent. AI is really up there, right? So competency is become a commonized thing now because AI is really filling in a lot of gaps, right? If you know how to use it and all that. But character, AI can do character, right? And I think great leaders are a place they have great character and great competency, right? So for me, when I engage with clients or leaders, a different capacity, whether as a CRO capacity in the organization or as a on-the-job CRO coach or on-the-job CE coach or as a public speaker and so on, people leave with increased competency and character. Competency you can learn, character you can't. So for me, that's the success story for me. You have people leaving going, hey, Abi, since you spoke about X, Y, and Z, I've started to think about my team this way. I've started to think about culture this way. I've started to think about, forecasting this way. I've started to think about our daily process or our daily execution with our customers this way. For me, that's the biggest impact, right? I've started to think about my leadership. I've started to think about how I'm just thinking about it all wrong. I started to think about how can I be better? Because again, as a leader, I talk about learning, unlearning, and relearning. Because what I have is what I'm going to give to the business of my teams. So if I, as a leader, am not growing, I'm not learning, unlearning, and relearning, which a lot of leaders don't do, then I can't give the best to my team or any organization. Even at the stage that I am, I'm constantly learning, unlearning, and relearning. Try to look at, different perspectives, new solutions. How do you think about this? How do you adapt and move with the times and so on and so forth? That's a constant motion that a lot of leaders just don't, because you're not just going to apply 90-20-27 frameworks to today. It's constantly changing, right? So yeah. I think that is key, and this is something that a lot of people take away.
You mentioned that character can't be learned. Could you explain a bit more about that?
Because character is a place of value, ethics, right? And people develop their character based on how they were raised, their environments, their privileges. So, for example, I think my character was based out of lack of certain privileges, so I just had to kind of find my way and so on. So I challenge the status quo a lot. I'm very fearless, I'm very shameless, because I've had to fight all my life. So for me, fighting is not a thing, it's not a new thing, like, oh my god, like it's just like it is, it is because of my circumstance, being black, being female, and so on in this space, right? So I think it's difficult to learn. However, if you really have the mind or the mindset knowing that you are becoming, nobody is in a state of done. Everybody's becoming, everybody's growing, right? I need to take the action to think about, how can I be a better leader to my team? How can I be a better better provider to my clients? How can I be a better mother? How can I be a better friend? How can I be a better husband? So it's really about looking at yourself and identify, what are your strengths? What are the things that you're great at? And what are the things that you need to learn, unlearn, and relearn? And I think if we can all be accountable for that, perfection doesn't exist, but better does. How can we be better? How can you, even in sales, right? A lot of people forget that sales is like a sport, right? If you said you play basketball, right? You go to training, you look at your tactics, you look at your skills, you have a coach. A lot of people don't have a coach. Their coach, they don't even look at their skills. They don't train. Sales needs to be trained. Your discovery, your ability to ask questions, your ability to listen. It's a sport that needs to be mastered. Same way as leadership. It's a sport that needs training, master, and continuous growth, continuous learning and unlearning. Right? As a basketball player, you have skills that you've learned that you need to unlearn because this is not serving you. A lot of people are not thinking about these things. We're just in motion of plug and play. And that is why a lot of things are broken today.
Because I think that you're right. It is harder to improve character than it is to improve competence, because character is deep within. But I feel like for leaders, it's your duty and your responsibility to grow in your character, because your character is what's going to impact not just the business, but also your employees, your team members. Everything in some ways hangs off of your character. Because look, I had a role where I was taking over something new. So I wasn't necessarily as competent in the tool, but my character enabled me to bring the right people in who are more competent in some of those things. And actually it worked better because I have a tendency to jump in and fix stuff, right? So for me, it was good I wasn't as competent in this area because I had to rely on character and the competencies of other people. So I think for leaders, it's so important that you work on your character.
Exactly, but Tolu, do you know what? A lot of people don't even get this stuff, which is like, boom, mind-blowing.
No.
And even if you had to rate it, character is actually more important, because if you have the right character of winning, character of learning, you can learn anything. You can be competent at anything because you have a character of success. You have a character, of integrity. Yeah, amazing stuff.
So Abi, just as we close, we are going to do our tick fire questions. Are you ready?
Let's go.
So if you could create your own podcast, who would be your first guest?
Oh, I think Trump.
Interesting. Why?
Yeah, Trump will be my first guest because I want to get behind his character, his psyche, how he grew up, how he thinks. I want to understand his philosophy of the world, because some things that he comes out to say, I'm just like, did you just say that? So I'd love to dig in to him to his character. Yeah, I want to understand his psyche, all the wires that exist in his head and so on. I really want to get my hands on that, and maybe I could develop some empathy and understanding.
Okay.
But yeah, he would be my first guest.
That is probably the last person I would have ever guessed would have been your first guest.
he can make a lot of impact. He can make a lot of impact globally. So yeah, that's why it comes top of mind. Yeah.
Okay. When you're hiring, what are the top 3 things that you look for in someone?
Firstly, I look at, does this person, I first look at my team and what my team doesn't have. So I believe in hiring for diverse teams. So I look at what do I have in my team right now, and what do we need from a skill perspective, from a gender perspective, from a nationality perspective, and so on and so forth. But the 3 things I look at for me, it's mindset and character. Like, does this person have a winning mindset? Does this person have a learning mindset? Is another thing that I look for, because I want people who are open to feedback and can develop themselves and like learning and know that perfection doesn't exist, but learning is a thing. You have to be learning if you're around me. If you're not learning and you're not growing, we're gonna have a problem, right? So that's the second thing I look for in people. And thirdly, I love ambitious people. People that want to commit to what it takes to get to their goals. So if you want to be an NBA player, for example, great. But are you committed to what it takes? I was talking to my kids today and I said, look, if you're going to get A results, you're going to have to put in A effort. You can't put in C effort and expect an A result. It doesn't work. It takes work. It takes commitment. You got to do things while other people are sleeping to be excellent. You have to do it differently. You can't do normal things and expect you're going to get normal result, right? So those would be the 3 things I look for. Totally. Did you notice that those 3 things didn't really even have anything to do with the core role or competency or hard skills? It's all human skills.
No, exactly. Yeah. Human skills are the most important thing, because humans can do pretty much anything that they put their mind to.
Exactly.
If you could talk to the younger Abi just about to start her career, what advice would you give?
I would say careless. Careless. Like careless. I normally I've always been a challenger, status quo. Like, growing up they would say I was very stubborn, or I just have I have perspectives and opinions, and I think the younger Abi spent a lot of time caring about what people think and not understanding very, very quickly that people are the way they are because of different reasons and because of different motives. Right? I would dig in to go, but why would this person say this? But I'm not like that. And, dig in and try to, care over care and over analyze it. But I would say the younger Abi, I wish she quickly went through that process to understand that people do so many things because of, actually, it's got nothing to do with me most of the time. It's got to do with them and whatever is going on in their space. So trying to understand that so you can navigate that better. For example, like all the terrible managers going home and talking and crying about it. I wish I just say, look, this is the reality, and how do I just make it work for me versus let it get so into me. But then who knows? Maybe I won't be who I am today if I didn't go through those stages or those motions.
I love that. And final question. What are the 3 things that you would like someone to take away from the conversation that we've had today?
Number 1, always be a learner, lifelong learning. Regardless of whatever stage you get to, focus on mastery and developing. That's the stuff that's in your control. There's no limit on that. There's no limit on information. There's no limit on books. There's no limit on things that can help you be better as a human being, professionally and personally. There's no limit. Of course, there's different, limitations in the world and the systems in terms of equitability and so on and so forth. But in terms of learning and growing as an individual, there's no limit to that. So take advantage of it. So that would be number 1. Number 2, I would say, where you can, turn your trials into testimonies. Those trials have come, for a reason. They're not pleasant and so on. But how can you find the learning in everything that happens to you? What is the one learning that you can take from it? Because if not, it's wasted. That pain is wasted if you can't take a solid learning from it to help you propel you, right? Number three, I'd say just chill more. I think sometimes we overanalyze stuff and, we're overly stressed and so on and so forth. I would just say just breathe and just be in the present. I think sometimes we're looking forward so much. We're constantly like, what am I going to do next? Or what needs to happen next? What is the next step? Sometimes it's okay to just wallow in the present and just enjoy the present versus just constantly moving away to what's next. It's okay to just enjoy what's in front of you now, because next might never come. It's not promised.
Abi, thank you so much for being on the podcast. This has been an awesome conversation, and I know that this will help a lot of people. So thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to another episode of What Makes You Tick. I hope that you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed having the conversation.
Absolutely. There's so much value in learning from virtual mentors, people that have already gone through incredible careers, and they've got wonderful stories and lessons that they can share for you to have a bigger and better career in tech. And if you like this sort of content, we've also got a newsletter that we publish weekly called Growth Magnet, all about tech startups, leadership, scaling, and performance. We'll put a link in the show notes, and it'll be fantastic to see your comments on our next post.